I love this show. It has everything I want. Pretty dresses, sharp dialogue, a compelling exploration into ambition, family, and gender dynamics in a rapidly changing world. I mean, what more could a girl ask for? Hey everybody, today we're going to be doing a deep dive into the show that is The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel through kind of like a feminist, gendered lens. A quick overview of the show. The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is a comedy drama series set in the late 1950s and early 1960s. It follows the story of Miriam Maisel, a witty and charismatic upper-middle-class housewife in New York City, whose life takes an unexpected turn when her husband leaves her for his secretary the night before Yom Kippur. After discovering her own knack for stand-up comedy during a spur-of-the-moment drunken performance at a nightclub, Midge decides to pursue a career in comedy, a bold and unconventional path for a woman at the time. As Midge navigates the male-dominated world of stand-up, the show explores her journey of self-discovery, empowerment, and defiance of traditional gender roles. Along the way, she forms a partnership with her no-nonsense manager Susie Myerson and encounters real-life comedians and figures of the era. The show blends humor, drama, and social commentary to examine themes of ambition, gender, and societal expectations while celebrating the vibrant culture and fashion of mid-20th century New York. And with that being said and done, let's jump right into it and examine some specific characters in the show, starting with everybody's favorite, the title character, Miriam Maisel. Midge begins as the quintessential housewife, managing her home, her husband, Joel's needs with precision. She stays up later than Joel to take her makeup off and set her hair, then wakes up earlier to put her makeup back on. It's not explained in the show why she does this, but we can assume that she isn't ashamed of herself without makeup on. It's just what she's been taught her whole life to do, as we later see her mother doing the same thing. Later, we get a brief scene of Midge measuring herself to ensure that she stays, quote, proportional. This scene and the makeup scene are interesting to me. Midge does these tedious tasks not for her husband, but entirely for herself. Joel doesn't expect her to do these things, but she does them anyway. Maybe it's because that's what she expects a good wife to do. Maybe she just enjoys it, as she has been doing both.
Every day for 10 years. Even when you were pregnant? There's not enough daiquiris in the world.
Per the stereotype, we, the watcher, would assume that Midge is unhappy with her life. But quite the opposite is true. Her world completely fulfills her, and she doesn't wish for anything more. It's everything she's planned since she was a little girl. Then, Joel leaves her for his secretary, with her suitcase on Yom Kippur. I mean, what an asshole thing to do. That night, Midge chugs a bottle of Manischewitz and goes to the club where Joel often performs. Once she gets there, she drunkenly stumbles onto the stage and just begins to talk, and the few people there listen. While this first, I don't even know if you could call it a set, is not intentional and ends up getting her arrested. After he leaves her, Midge does defy societal norms by pursuing the stand-up career, rejecting the expected role of a divorcee seeking security in remarriage. She does find a relationship in season 2 with Benjamin, but that's shortly lived, and once she goes on tour, she quickly forgets about him and even writes him a letter to break off their engagement, which is, again, kind of an asshole thing to do, but it's kind of brushed over in the show completely. Throughout the first 2 seasons, we see Midge encounter frequent prejudice from male comedians and club owners who dismiss her because of her gender. Like this moment where she just wants to talk about her friend's pregnancy, or not pregnancy, just that she just had a baby, but then the club owner completely, literally pushes her off stage. Not cool. In the 3rd season, she gets her big break when Baldwin asks her to open for him on his world tour. She faces outright sexism during a xoxo stint where male performers undermine her authority. And when she goes to go take a picture with like all the servicemen, they blow a gust of wind under her skirt to like make her skirt flare up and like show the goodies, you know what I mean? The picture gets taken and it gets shown around for the entire press. And when she finds out, she's obviously infuriated, and Susie gets it taken down right then. But even though the shot shouldn't have been taken in the first place. Midge is criticized for spending time on her career instead of with her children often throughout the show, a critique rarely aimed at fathers like Joel. Her experience reflects the double standards surrounding work-life balance expectations for women at the time. And her and a fellow member of Shy's band talk about this while on tour. The band member's name is Carol, and she's also left her children at home, but she doesn't have a supportive ex-husband or current husband to help take care of them. She leaves them with her mother. But they have a very interesting conversation where they talk about their children staying behind while they're on tour.
You ever feel guilty? My dad was a traveling salesman. Gone 6 days out of 7. Nobody thought twice about that. What about your kids?
They live with their father while I'm gone.
Really? He takes the kids?
Yep.
Shit.
Midge uses her comedy to openly discuss female pleasure, divorce, and societal restrictions on women. Her unapologetic humor subverts traditional boundaries and reclaims female agency in public discourse. Again, we were talking about that moment with her best friend's pregnancy beforehand. Midge's impeccable wardrobe evolves from a symbol of conformity to a tool for commanding attention. But it's always very specifically curated. She thinks through every outfit in every single detail. On her first day of working for Gordon Ford, she wakes up 5 hours early just to make sure that she has the perfect outfit ready so that she can sit in it. It commands enough attention, and it works for during the day working and then also getting drinks with the gang after. And her glamorous style becomes an integral to her stage presence and professional identity. We see this reflected. She kind of has like a uniform for when she's performing. She often wears a sleek black dress and then some sort of either pearls or a fun necklace or something like that. In the beginning, we do see her more casual. Sometimes she'll be wearing like a fun pair of pants and a sweater. But later on, when she is doing more professional gigs, we see her fall into this kind of uniform. The series ends with Midge as a successful comedian living independently. Her life defies the conventions of marriage and domesticity, reflecting her ultimate victory over societal restrictions on women's roles. She's living in this giant apartment in New York. She kind of has gotten everything that she's wanted from this career. In the last episode, 4 minutes, she talks about how she wants this big life. She needs to get really, really famous. And we see in the very last moments of the series that she gets that. She has gotten crazy famous. She has all the money in the world. She has the big apartment, the grandkids, everything. But she's kind of alone while she's living this life. We see her walk through her apartment alone. Nobody is there. Her employees have all wrapped up work for the night. She eats dinner alone in the kitchen, not at her big dining room table with lots of friends. So we kind of get this sense of she's gotten the money and the apartment and the clothes and the fame, but now she doesn't have a lot of people to share it with. Joel has likely passed on at this point. Her kids, I don't know if they like her or not. Susie, she's reconnected with Susie, but Susie's like living in the Bahamas, and she calls her almost every night, but it's still kind of sad in the end. Moving on to everybody's favorite manager, Susie Myerson.
Trouble! Right here in River City. With a capital T, and that rhymes with P, and that stands for pool. We've surely got trouble. Right here in River City.
From her introduction, Susie subverts feminine norms. She wears masculine clothing, forgoes makeup, and carries herself with a tough, no-nonsense demeanor that contrasts sharply with Midge's polished appearance. Her lack of concern for traditional femininity and her preference for practicality reflect her rejection of gendered beauty standards. As I was saying earlier, like, she is like the polar opposite to Midge, and sometimes it's used for comedic effect, but it's mostly just interesting to see this like, almost this like Barbie and Oppenheimer view of them two. Susie uses sarcasm and biting humor to deflect prejudice and assert control in male-dominated conversations. Her sharp wit becomes a means of survival and dominance in a world that seeks to undermine her. Susie works in the male-dominated comedy and entertainment industry as a manager, a role typically reserved for men. She's often dismissed or underestimated because of her gender, but she uses her wit and strategic thinking to assert her authority. She's also often mistaken for a man. There's this moment at that USO tour where this army guy tries to convince Susie into enlisting because he thinks that she's a man. It's honestly pretty funny, but it's interesting to see. She earns the respect of powerful men like mobsters and club owners throughout the show, showcasing her ability to thrive in spaces where women are marginalized. This is best shown, I think, in The Roast. We're given a flash forward in the last season to where Susie is already incredibly successful, and the like big like heads of the industry throw like a dinner in her honor where everyone's eating dinner, but also they go up one by one and roast her. It's very funny and kind of just shows how much respect she's gotten to be at the top of her game while also being a woman at that time. Unlike Midge, who comes from a wealthy background, Susie is working class. Her rough around the edges demeanor and street smarts highlight the additional challenges faced by women without social privilege in male-dominated professions. And her struggle for financial stability and legitimacy reflects the broader challenges working class women face in securing professional success. Once Midge and her go out on tour, she sublets her apartment to Jackie, her co-worker at the Gaslight. Like, frequently talks about how she doesn't have enough money to afford this. She steals a car and then replaces the license plates on it when they first go on like a mini tour. A lot of things. When Midge has like this like goodbye dinner for when she's about to go to the Catskills, Susie like assumes that she's going there for 2 weeks, because Susie's never like had this life where she can just go away for the summer. She's never gotten to have that luxury, and I believe she actually says like, Midge is like, oh well, what do you do in the summer? Do you just like stay here? And Susie's like, yes, I stay here and I sweat like a bum and I wait till it gets cold again and then I do that again. While Midge is this kind of all-around superwoman, Susie is our window into reality. She doesn't have her life together, and it's honestly kind of nice to see at times when it looks like Midge has got it all figured out. While the show never explicitly labels Susie's sexuality, her rejection of romantic relationships and traditional domestic life positions her kind of outside of this heteronormative gender role. Her relationship with Jackie, her co-worker at the Gaslight, is very funny. When Susie sublets her apartment to him, he kind of takes on this like wife role. He completely redecorates the place, adds in a Murphy bed and like a privacy curtain for their bathroom, and he kind of like makes the place his own. He has like a feminine robe that he wears. It's very, very funny. And then on Susie's kind of relationship with her sexuality, it isn't touched on until like the very last season when we meet Gordon Ford, like the big television personality. We meet his wife, Hetty, and it's said like kind of subliminally that Susie and Hetty used to date when they were in college. But then Hetty got like engaged, her mother like had her get engaged while she was in France, and the relationship kind of all blew up in Susie's face. But Susie tells Midge that she was always kind of uncomfortable in this relationship, Hetty was like gorgeous and tall and redhead and like all these things, and Susie says that she looks like her dog, which is honestly very, very sad, but it's kind of her relationship with her relationships. And then also when Midge first suspects that Susie is gay, she takes her to a lesbian bar, and Susie is just like, this is not my scene, I don't want in on this. Kind of while we're touching on sexuality in general, I kind of wanted to quickly touch on Shy Baldwin. Shy is a popular singer and performer at the time of the show. He's modeled after real-life performers of the late 1950s and early 1960s, blending elements of artists like Johnny Mathis and Harry Belafonte, who actually appears at Shy's wedding in the show. Midge originally meets him when they're both performing at an arthritis telethon, actually meet in the women's bathroom. We never learn like why Shy uses the women's bathroom, but it's interesting to see after what we learn later in the show about him and his sexuality. His public persona aligns with traditional masculine ideals of the time: smooth talking, handsome, and confident. This persona is carefully curated to appeal to a broad audience, especially women who idolize him as a romantic figure. But behind closed doors, Shy is a far more complex character, grappling with his identity and the need to hide his true self. His vulnerability is most evident in his private conversations with Midge, where he reveals aspects of his personality that contract his public image. After he's late to a gig that he's supposed to be playing, Midge goes and finds him on his boat, where he has been beat up, essentially, by a guy. And we learn that Shy is very gay, but like cannot speak about it, has to pretend that he's straight because obviously being gay in the 1950s as like a public pop star, not okay. After learning about Shy's sexuality, Midge like doesn't care, but just goes through the realizations. Midge accidentally alludes to Shy's sexuality in her set at the Apollo after she has a nervous and frantic conversation with Reggie, where she is basically saying like, I don't know what to do, I'm so scared, like these are not my people that I talk to. And Reggie tells her that this is the hometown crowd and just to talk about Shy. She takes that in stride and talks about Shy, which then gets her fired because she makes a Judy Garland joke. Judy Garland was like, basically if you said that a guy was like Judy Garland, you were basically calling him gay. She was already a gay icon at the time. So by saying that he should just click his Judy Garland shoes to go home, she was basically calling him gay, which his team could not have. When she gets fired standing on the tarmac waiting for the plane to go, she asks Reggie, she's like, you told me to say these things. You said to talk about Shy. And Reggie says, I didn't know that you knew that much about Shy. Basically saying, I didn't know you knew that he was gay, and these people can't be knowing that. To combat this questioning of his sexuality, Shy's team takes large steps to ensure that not just his image, but Shy himself stays on the straight and narrow. They have him get married to a woman who he thinks is okay, but like is not in love with in the slightest bit. I mean, obviously he is a gay man, like living as a gay man in the 1950s. And Midge actually attends Shy's wedding, and at the wedding she's pulled aside by his team and is offered $2,000 to basically keep her mouth shut, and she does not take it at all. She like vehemently refuses it, in fact, saying that she wasn't going to tell anyone anyway, and it's insulting that they think that she would, and to offer her money for that is an insult to her character.
And the devil will drag you under by the fancy tie round your wicked throat. Sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down, you're rocking a boat.
Joel is introduced as the typical 1950s man, working hard during the day as a plastic salesman and playing hard at night trying to break into comedy. His feelings of inadequacy after his failed comedy attempts and Midge's comedic success reflect the pressures men face to be the primary breadwinners and sources of talent in their relationships. Joel's initial abandonment of Midge is triggered by his jealousy and frustration over his own shortcomings. He cheats with his secretary, Penny, symbolizing a retreat into traditional gender dynamics where men hold power and women play submissive roles. However, as Midge rises in comedy, Joel's growth comes from learning to admire and support her talent instead of feeling threatened by it. We very quickly forget about Joel cheating because he is such like a charming and loving guy. And by the end of the show, he has like fully atoned for his sins. And when Midge is about to go on live television to do her set, he is like, I don't care what you say, insult me whatever you want, da 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 da. Midge is obviously like, I was gonna do that anyway, but thanks for your blessing. Joel is an active and engaged father throughout the series as well. He balances co-parenting duties with his own career, showing flexibility and willingness to be present, even when societal expectations don't prioritize fatherly engagement. When Midge and him are actually getting divorced, the judge is very surprised that he's taking a role in his kids' lives.
Are they going on the road with you?
No, I'm taking care of them.
But you're the father.
I know.
He's the father.
I know.
What am I missing here?
A fucking photo shoot.
He's the father. He's going to take care of the kids. You're not missing anything.
Despite their divorce, Joel remains deeply protective of Midge's safety and well-being. After leaving her, he still intervenes when she's in trouble or vulnerable, showing his ongoing care. He even, like we see at the end of the series, like takes her off of the mob's hands and puts him in the line of fire from the mob, and ends up going to jail for like 20 years because of it. When Midge didn't get them into that situation, Susie did, but Joel like takes all of the blame and goes to jail for Midge, his divorced wife, just showing how much he still loves her and cares about her. And then a more specific moment when Midge and Susie just come back from their first little tour. The club owner is withholding Midge's payment and saying that like, she was late, she wasn't very good, she doesn't get paid. So she calls Joel and he like beats the guy up for her. Susie's like, why do we have to call him? Like, we could have handled this. And Midge is like, sometimes in a man's role, you gotta get a man to do it for you. Next up, Joel's in-laws, Midge's parents, Abe and Rose Weissman.
On the other side of the tracks, that is where I'm going to be. On the other side of that great divide.
Starting with Abe, at the series start, Abe represents the archetypal patriarch. He is a respected professor at Columbia University and the primary provider for his family, reinforcing that 1950s ideal of man's identity being tied to his professional success and authority at home. His reaction to Midge's divorce and her stand-up comedy career reflects a discomfort with women stepping outside conventional roles, as he struggles to accept her nonconformity. When she first tells him that Joel has left her, he immediately tells her to go get him back. Put on her best dress, like soak it up and go get him back. And then after losing his secure academic position, Abe's sense of identity and worth is destabilized. His journey toward becoming a theater critic represents his shift from traditional stability to a more passion-driven, unconventional career. Abe's initial relationship with Midge is very dismissive of her ambitions, but he grows to appreciate her talent, symbolizing his acceptance of changing gender dynamics and moving beyond rigid expectations of female subservience. And then at a dinner with his friends near the end of the show, he goes on this long monologue about how he never gave Midge the same opportunities that he did with his older son, Noah, and how even though she never got the same opportunities, she's an incredible, strong person, and he's like really admires that about her. Rose begins the series as a glamorous, refined homemaker entirely devoted to her family's social status and appearance. Despite her surface-level conformity, Rose demonstrates a fierce strategic mind. Her matchmaking skills hint at her talent for business and negotiation, traits she increasingly embraces as the series progresses. Her attempt to build a matchmaking empire highlights her desire for autonomy and professional identity beyond her roles as a wife and mother. She stumbles into matchmaking accidentally after making one successful match and completely builds an empire. The official matchmakers of New York are threatened by her and call a meeting to tell her to stop, and she tells them very obviously, no, I will not stop, you're gonna have to get through me. To which they supposedly cancel her flights, burn her office, her tea room down. They confront Abe in public. They do lots of shady, crazy things. And she tackles them all and keeps her empire going. Rose reveals to Abe that their lifestyle has been fully funded by her trust fund, not his salary like he thought, challenging his sense of traditional male responsibility as the primary provider. She travels to Oklahoma to request additional money from her wealthy family after her trust fund runs out. Instead of securing funds, Rose rebukes her family for their misogynistic attitudes and refuses to support her business ambition. Next, everybody's second favorite comedian, Lenny Bruce.
I see trees of green, red roses too.
Lenny acts as this sort of mentor to Midge, encouraging her to embrace her unique voice in the world of comedy. Unlike many male comedians, Lenny doesn't see Midge as a novelty or a lesser performer because of her gender. Instead, he respects her talent and is one of the few people who truly believes in her. Lenny's personal life is fraught with emotional and legal turmoil. He struggles with addiction, relationships, and the law, making him a deeply complex figure. One day, Midge finds him passed out on the side of the road in the middle of a snowstorm, and she brings him back to her apartment with her. And when he wakes up in the morning, he's completely confused and not okay with this. And then after playing a set at Carnegie Hall, a very prestigious venue, as I think as New Yorkers we all know, he brings Midge onto the stage and says why aren't you opening for anybody? That's how you start this. And Midge says, I don't want to just start this. I want to be headlining my own things. And Lenny gives her a very persuasive speech being no, this is how you start this. If you want to get to where I am, if you want to get to Carnegie Hall, you have to start by opening up for people. That's just how this business works. Next, everybody's least favorite comedian, Sophie Lennon. Sophie Lennon is initially introduced as a successful but highly stereotypical comedian who capitalizes on the fat lady comedy trope. An extremely Jewish housewife, Sophie embodies the archetype of a woman who is safe for audiences to laugh at, someone who conforms to the comedic norms of the era, where women are either glamorous or the butt of the joke. However, her private life is the complete opposite of this character. She lives an intensely privileged life with servants who dote on her every need, a lavish apartment, and having attended Yale Drama School. After firing Harry Drake, her esteemed manager, she calls on Susie to be her new manager after seeing how fiercely she defended Midge at that arthritis telethon. She tells Susie that her dream is to be on Broadway as the leading lady in a serious play, and Harry Drake never let her do that. So, Susie pulls it off. She jumps through hoops to get Sophie an amazing theater, an A-list cast, and the best of the best team. It all looks like it's going to work out, and Sophie is going to be the new face of the Great White Way. But then on opening night, she cracks. She goes up on stage in this very serious play and starts doing her Sophie voice and act, and completely ruins the show. She blames Susie for all of this happening when it's not Susie's fault at all. She's the one who made it possible. Sophie got scared and realized that if the audience didn't like it, she was going to be slammed across newspapers and the TV. Later, when she has a brief resurgence in the show, when she heads up a new NBC show called Seconds Count, and she hires Midge to be like her warm-up act for the live studio audience. Then, when she sees that Midge is actually doing well and doing her job, and the audience is laughing at her, she feels intensely threatened by her, and they have a huge argument in front of the audience. That's it for characters. I kind of wanted to do a brief conclusion, kind of asking, or really answering the question of, is the show realistic? And does that even matter? The show is absolutely not realistic. I think anyone who's asked that question would say the same. Gemma Range writes about this in her article called How the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel Gilds the 1950s and Gets Away with It. She says that the show's, quote, delights lie instead in the fact that audiences can enjoy Maisel's highly stylized parallel universe without it ever lulling us into believing it is real. Instead, the picture-perfect sets of Mrs. Maisel result in a kind of uncanny valley, like how old Hollywood studio sets designed to look like New York only somehow highlight that they're not. Basically, it's saying that the show isn't realistic and isn't trying to convince anyone that it is. She goes on to explain how the show is so unrealistic that it can even feel like a musical at times, with its over-exaggerated movement, bright colors, and gliding over certain topics. That kind of leads me to talk about a big criticism of the show, which is that it completely, quote, gilds the time period. While the show does briefly acknowledge issues of the time, like racism, it certainly doesn't represent the full scale of how pervasive and damaging that these issues were. However, this lack of realism feels intentional rather than negligent. The show's exaggerated, almost dreamlike aesthetic reflects Midge's perspective. Her privileged, upper-class, white, Jewish upbringing in New York City shapes how she experiences the world. She isn't someone who actively seeks out challenges or systemic injustices beyond those that directly impact her, mainly sexism comedy. Rather than presenting an unfiltered depiction of the 1950s and 60s, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel offers a heightened, idealized version of the era, using its stylization to tell a specific story rather than serve as a kind of historical document. That's all I had for this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye!